Welcome to Dive into the Mind with Helen and Toni. Today, we are going to talk about the ego and its journey to keep us small and how it turns up in lots of different outfits and ways as a chameleon to break us down, to keep us from our love and peace and, put us into a place of what it thinks is safety when really it's actually, causing havoc in our lives. So welcome, Helen, my beautiful friends. Thank you for coming and being here, and tell us a little bit about your journey and how you came to sort of being this, this devourer of information when it comes to the mind.
I think I love to study. I think I was good academically, so I've just carried that throughout my entire life. It brings me a lot of joy to study. And I think when you study, you can avoid the application of, so you can keep yourself busy studying. But then you kind of realize that you can only really master something if you actually apply it. So I've managed many people, and I have often been confused by some of their behaviors, which I think has naturally kind of led me to do a little bit more study on how I can better assist them and be a better leader for them. And I think part of it is also, how do you better understand yourself and evolve as a person and a being? So they're the things that have really driven me. And I think, the two of us have been on a beautiful journey together. And I think, we just wanted things to change. Yeah. And like what was the thing that came up for you?
I think if I think about it, taking a step back on a global perspective, I just didn't want to live. I just knew something inside of me was telling me I didn't want to live in a state of fear anymore. And I didn't really have the vocabulary for that when I was going through it, but now I kind of can see that. And it's really interesting you say something that came up this weekend, which we're going to get into as you get into sort of the episode. For me was actually also like there's some healing that comes from being the healer. And so as I hear you talk about kind of the learning through books and sort of reading and classes and those kind of things, but also the physical application and embodiment. And then as something as you teach it to other people, there's really, it's really interesting how that cycle goes around for both people on the end of the scale, and it becomes this sort of like master and child like energy, which is certainly what the lesson that the ego brought to me this weekend in a big way. So I'm really excited to jump in. We did it today on Instagram Live. So here's the episode, and we're so happy to have you with us. Thanks again for coming, and enjoy.
Bye.
Let's go.
We are talking about the ego today, and we are talking about the mind and how it plays tricks and all of the little things that it does. And we are going to jump straight in. Helen and I have been coming at the concept of the mind from two different ways. We both approach things very differently. Helen has a cerebral approach. Mine is sort of an embodiment / try everything, learn everything, sort of expose myself to everything. And here's a perfect example. Thanks everyone for joining us. A perfect example.
What goes wrong with life?
Yes. Hi, beautiful. Yes, and going with the flow. Okay. So why don't you, Helen, jump in first and tell everyone kind of what the paperwork version of what ego is.
Okay.
And then this.
and fix my phone. So in terms of what ego is, so we have this standard, I guess, the dictionary definition of ego, which is a person's assessment of their self-importance and value. And then I think coming from the spiritual perspective, where we're all chasing evolved consciousness, we've experienced ego as being shadow or self-sabotage or grandioseness. And what's your experience of ego?
Okay, well, I'm going to jump straight in. So this weekend I did a plant medicine retreat, and I got basically handed a giant Warpass can of learning about ego and my ego and a stripping of that ego. And it was pretty pretty amazing and pretty humbling. And I think what you just shared about sort of this self-importance or separation is really kind of where it went for me. It started on the first night, this experience where I watched everyone kind of going through their thing, and I was like, they're not doing it right. I know how to do it better. I've done this work. I don't have to do this. I know who I am. And a lot of really like deeply ingrained sort of feelings of like, I am better. And it's like, and let me just say, there's a hell of a lot of shame that's going with this in this moment too, because I'm ashamed to say it out loud, but that's really what I was thinking. Like, I've done this work. I don't need to do this anymore. You know, I know who I am. I know what I'm here to do. And, you know, these people aren't even like, you know, doing the experience right. They're sort of like getting caught up in other things, and they're not even like going full in as I did, or I would, or I have. So it was pretty ugly. And then it's sort of
when did you notice it was beginning to get ugly? And how is it that you were not able to stop? Like, when did you kind of go, oh, this has just gotten out of control?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be honest, in the experience overnight, I was very much like in all of those feelings of like, I know who I am, and I don't need to do this anymore, and watching everybody else and being just so relieved. You know, maybe this is what the ego trick it plays with you, but I was so relieved that I wasn't like crying and screaming and purging and having all of these experiences, because I had done that work. And whilst I maybe have cleared some of that stuff, you know, it felt like, again, that like gave me a comfort because I was better because I had done it. So going into the next day, I started to see it manifest and come into kind of like the understanding of actually what I went through when we did the first share circle, when I was like, you know, I know who I am, and I just didn't need to do it, and I was watching everyone else. And then I was watching, like, I became kind of conscious, maybe came to, I started to see it because I was judging everybody else. As we were going around the share circle, everybody was like, you know, I had this, and even just the way, like, you know, people were talking and how they were talking, I was just like, ugh, and like, oh, I wouldn't, you know, like, I would never do that, or I'm not that, or that's just so like poor behavior to do that. Like, it was so many levels. And then as we finished the share circle and then kind of had time to ourselves and sort of digest over the afternoon, I started to then get really obsessed with what the leader or the sort of head of the group thought about me, and what his opinion was on my level of consciousness, and his opinion on how conscious and woke I was. I mean, it's funny as hell, because I'm like, you know, I really was like, oh, I'm so woke and I'm so conscious. Like, I know what I'm doing. And I could feel it in the way I held my body. I felt it in the way I interacted. You know, there was, you sent me that chart, and maybe we can put that up for Instagram people, about the different vibrational levels in sort of like pride and, you know, shame and different things. And I even felt this sort of like the way I walked around, like, I don't need to help anyone do anything around here, because I'm just like, like, it was really ugly. But at the time, like, I was almost out of body in how it was happening. But
you're possessed by your alter ego.
Absolutely. Like, it was fully deep coming out, like manifesting in so many different ways. And I tried to sort of like, there was a knowing that it was ugly, and there was a knowing that it wasn't the best way, and there was a knowing that that I was on the wrong path, but I couldn't quite see the forest for the trees. And it kept developing and really started becoming a lot more heavier about the teacher, and wanting to him, and just being sort of like, what's he thinking? And then I got paranoid. It was like it started to play tricks in me in other ways. I would listen to, I was sort of like an eagle eye watching him everywhere he went, what he was doing. And, you know, like having moments of humor within myself, but also just not being able to kind of stop. And I heard him speaking to someone, you know, like he said something like, it's always funny for me to watch people that think they're really awake and really aware, but they're not really. And I was like, oh my God, is he talking about me? Is it me? And then I'm like, but I think I really am, but I know I am. It's cool, I am. And then I would sit back and then I would go into it. And then at the same time, I would be like, no, but he can't be, but maybe he is. And so we kept watching, and then it was like I was watching his eyes for some sort of like crumb, going back to those scavenger dogs again at my feet. Like I was literally looking for any sort of crumb that I was of value or of worth, or I had something that he deemed as valuable, or he deemed as worthy, or he deemed as like anything. It really was crazy. And so then fast forward into the ceremony, and I was kind of fully integrated into the plant medicine experience, and it became clear in a sense that like nothing really matters. Like nothing what anybody thinks, nothing what I think, nothing matters in the scheme of like, let's kind of go to the spirituality side of ego, like it really is, everything's dissolved, everything is in perfect order. And I called him over, I felt myself kind of be like, hey, come on over. And I said, so I just need to know what you think. And he said, I mean, it was like I was very much in the comical side of it at this point. Like I was conscious, but at the same time, like it was still like it had to work itself out of me. It was almost we're talking about ego, and we're talking about the journey of me learning how to see my ego and how it kind of took over me this weekend.
And then maybe if you could share the breadcrumbs for the scavengers of the dogs.
Oh yeah. So anyone that hasn't heard before, Marianne Williamson talks about the ego sort of being like the scavenger dogs, where it's basically like these dogs that bark at our feet, and how they're always trying to take us down and always trying to make us small, to make us not believe in ourselves, to separate us and kind of keep in a different place. And that really is what, like, I started to see all of those like breadcrumbs of like things that it was planting everywhere to try and see what I would sniff out and what I would like gobble up. So
and I think it's almost like once one of them starts, then the whole pack just gets in on it.
Yes, it was like a feeding. It absolutely was like a feeding frenzy of all different levels of who I was and who I wasn't, and it was pretty amazing. And also to be honest, like out of body of it to some degree, and at the same time, kind of consciously watching myself unfold as these types of things were happening. So I said to him, what do you think? And his very diplomatic response was, which was incredibly humorous at the time, like, I think about what? And I laughed and basically just said, don't mess with me. You know what I'm asking about. Like, tell me what you think about me. And it was like vomit almost coming out of me that I had to like say those words, but I really had to get them out because I had to like let it go. It was only the way I could kind of release it. And he told me this really beautiful story about, the balance and the delicacy, the delicateness and the humility of being a master and a child, and the childlike wonder and sort of exploring things with sort of a beginner's mind, but at the same time, having the mastery of knowing, the games that our mind plays and all of those types of things. So I laughed and thanked him for that message. And at the same time, kind of almost one more time was like, so I just, what do you think of me? I had to ask it one more time and kind of laughed. And I was like, don't worry, I'm just fucking with you. And then he left. And it was such a nice thing.
And you're like, no, I'm not. I really, really want the answer.
Yeah, like I saw myself kind of, again, arguing out with myself of like, no, I really do want to know. And it's like, no, you don't. But, or I needed to. And what was that going to like, what was that going to bring to me but at the same time, I really don't. There was such a, it was like I dissolved. My entire body, my entire being dissolved into a knowing that I didn't need to know, and that was all ego, and it just all dissipated, and that was it. And then I spent, most of the time sort of laughing and crying and just being like, it doesn't matter, nothing matters. Like, nothing truly matters when we're like one with ourselves, one with the universe, one with each other. And it was very, very humbling, that's for sure.
So there's definitely like a couple, I mean, what a great story. There's definitely a couple of things that you brought up that I want to talk about.
Yeah.
So you're in a new environment, you're with a group of people, and when we're with new people, we just want to belong, because that's like one way of connected.
Yeah.
So you're in there kind of wanting to belong, but then you're going in and kind of going, well, I've done this and I've done that, and I don't need to do this, and all this sort of stuff. So when we're I guess when we're in a community and we're looking to belong, you can be the brilliant one, you can be the different one, you can be the carer, or you can be the one. So, the person going, I can't do this, like, somebody help me, somebody may always need their hand held, and they're always going to be insecure when they do those sorts of things. But in every single dynamic, you're probably going to find those personalities, and you can fluctuate between which one you are at any given point in time. There's one thing that's come up for me a lot recently, especially with clients, is that we come onto the planet, we're completely dependent on our parents for the first couple of years until we can learn how to walk and eat the food that they give us. So we're always looking for external validation.
Yes.
And then when you go to school, you get told, oh, good boy, good girl. So everyone's always externally validating you.
Yeah.
And I don't think I was ever, nobody even mentioned to me, well, what about your internal validation system? It's like, if you were to look around and kind of go, okay, I did this is good, other people are telling me it's good. Nobody kind of really ever sits you down and kind of go and says to you, well, how do you know if you're doing good? Like, because in this scenario, you were externally seeking validation.
Yes.
With the leader of the course.
Yeah.
And there's an element of, even at work, like when I was managing people, it used to drive me crazy. It was like, how do they not know that they're good, and they consistently need validation from me that they're doing a great job? It's kind of like, how do you have an internal sense of knowing and value based upon, the 2 or 3 years that we've worked together, that I think you're doing great, but do I need to tell you in every meeting that we have that you're doing great, unless you've done something exceptional and you've stepped up a level? So it's really, I think we need to build a self-awareness and acknowledgement movement.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I definitely know that, going back to the belonging, I think that also came up, that at the end of the sort of each night, they have a sort of community section where, folks would share some soup together and kind of like finish up the night type thing in a ceremonial type experience. And the first night I missed out on the soup, and I slept through it, and it wasn't. So the next day I was so angry that I had been excluded from the soup, and I literally spent hours just telling everybody that I was angry that I'd been through the soup and that I'd missed out on the soup. So it really triggered that belonging, and it really triggered that sort of feeling of like, how do I find that belonging within myself versus sort of be looking again for externally, and to sort of kind of bring that second point around is like, I don't think we were ever taught, I certainly wasn't taught as a kid, what it was to sort of even kind of bring my own care and love. And it was interesting as I was kind of digesting on this with one of my coaches today about the experience. We sort of looked at, like, as I kind of hold the mastery that I have and the learnings and the knowledge and the consciousness that I do have. I mean, that is based on just sort of my journey along this. And at the same time, then hold space for the sort of almost like the toddler version of myself that's kind of just wildly going around the room, you know, learning things. It was really interesting. We talked about, you know, what kind of does that toddler need to be guided through, kind of almost like what we didn't get when we were younger, to be guided through this journey of consciousness so that I can evolve and have a growth, you know, journey, and actually sort of maturity to that toddler. And, you know, we talked about things like boundaries, you know, the freedom to explore without judgment, environment to be able to do that exploration safely. And if we think about all of us as kids, you know, we weren't necessarily given or set up for some of these things. Encouragement, discussion and processing these lessons, you know, gentle language, which we talked about in the first week about, you know, talks of how language is important to our experience of learning growth. You know, I think if we often just bash ourselves with our language, we don't necessarily need sort of evolve, because we just keep ourselves stuck in this, again, loop of that we're not something and therefore we need to be a lack kind of place.
I think everything that you're kind of bringing up, I think one of the key things that I've realized this week is that it all comes back to truth.
Yeah.
And when you're absolutely true with yourself in every single moment.
Yeah.
And when we talk about the language that we use with ourselves.
Yes.
And I often use the word resourceful or productive or constructive.
Yeah.
Because I want to use the word good, because good has so many connotations from childhood, and it can trigger that in a child. So at the end of the day, we're all adults, and we need to remind ourselves of the age that we are.
Yes.
And when that inner child is triggered, you need to go, okay, I'm actually a 37 or a 44 or a 30-year-old woman or man. And right now, something from my childhood is being triggered.
Yes.
So as a 30, 37, 44-year-old person, like, I just need to take a deep breath in and realize that an emotion in me has been triggered due to a scenario.
Yeah.
And I need to activate my thinking brain.
Yes.
And see that I am in control of the situation, and see that I can actually respond to it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's almost a balance of activating the thinking brain, but also melting into the heart, which is where the truth is. And, you know, that was for me, like, as I go through all those things of, you know, what that child might need, most of it was just love and acceptance and this level of compassion and observation and awareness. So, you know, like the mature person can bring that, but then the toddler is just wanting to explore. So it's then how do you hold space for all of those parts of ourselves to integrate and then, you know, mature the toddler version into sort of the master version, and that kind of back and forth. Yeah.
In a conscious process, gosh.
Tell us what in a conscious process means. Break that down.
So conscious is like we're talking right now. So conscious as in talk therapy, as in writing something.
Okay.
To do inner child work at a conscious level, I could not really tell you of any techniques. I know that once you get into meditation and hypnotherapy, guided meditations, that's where you can really start to heal the inner child.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you were going to do it consciously, which is like, you know, let's talk through a scenario right now. So in that instance that you described, let's just say you were 4 years old and you were reminded, and if you spent some time there kind of going, well, what's the memory that comes up for me when I feel this feeling? It's like clearly there's a feeling of exclusion. So what was the memory that you felt? Or what was the most similar memory or collection of experiences that you felt?
Yeah, I think if I go back to belonging, and maybe we can use that as an example, for me as a child, I think because my family, you know, my father was off and my mum was busy, there was never a sense that really I had a unit or anything to belong to, and therefore I had to just like make my own way in the world. And therefore that sort of gets triggered whenever I kind of get into any group environment and I feel excluded. And even it's interesting because it's almost like my ego will sometimes trick me to make me then retract and exclude myself, of which then triggers the exclusion even more and the belonging even more, which goes deeper into that. Well, of course, nobody wants me a part of it anyway, so it doesn't even matter, you know.
Right. Yeah. So you raised some awesome points. So to keep you in your comfort zone. So your familiar as a child was that your parents were busy and they were working.
Yes.
And your familiar was, I'm going to tune out into my own zone. And that's the way that I know that I'm protected and that I'm safe.
Yeah.
So therefore, when you get into a group dynamic now and you're being excluded, you go into your safe zone, which is to isolate, which is what you did as a kid.
Yes.
And then, so to kind of consciously work through this belief as a child. So your parent, okay, so let's just say you were 4 years old, your parents were always working, they were never there. What would a 4-year-old assume about themselves if they were perceived to be neglected? Be 4 years old. I want you to be a 4-year-old and answer that question.
I think I'm feeling it would be that I did something wrong, or I'm I'm not like I don't want to like fun enough or something to play with or whatever, that they're not interested in spending time with me, whatever that means. Yeah.
And is any of that true? Was any of that true then?
No, obviously, like so far from ridiculously true. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it never was true. It's just that as a 4-year-old, you didn't have the ability to rationalize.
Yeah.
And you were coming at it from a survival kind of instinct. And what I find is that a lot of people who have had similar experiences, or they've been the youngest person, or their needs were never prioritized out of all the siblings, they all have these confused childhoods, and then they put other people on pedestals and they're always trying to please. So it's very common, it's very subtle. All of us were like, well, we had food on the table, we had parents who did play with us. Yes, they work 7 days a week, so we should be grateful for the experience that we had. However, it leaves an impact on you as an adult in terms of how you connect.
Yes, and I think even coming back to this weekend too, there were elements of putting that person that was leading it on the pedestal, leading the retreat, that they had all the answers and that they knew everything. And but at the same time, there this like emotions of like knowing that I'm here to lead groups and do similar work, and wanting to be where they were at. So it was kind of like this real conflict between allowing him to be the leader, allowing myself to be the person that was being led, and also looking at the fact, well, what do they have that I don't? It was so many things that was literally coming around. And even I think as I looked at it with the brain from the perspective of having done events for so many years, I was looking at the production and also the team that were hosting, and wanting to feel like I was part of that. And then kind of when they were whispering and chatting about different things, I felt left out, that I wasn't included in the sort of core team that was running it. And I mean, that's ridiculous, because that wasn't my role. My role was to be a guest and to be held and looked after through their leadership, but that sort of triggered that then, well, if I was better or if I was more something, then I would be part of that too, which, you know, again, is crazy.
Yeah. And how do you, I guess that's, you know, you have this identity that I guess you had for maybe 15 to 20 years as you worked in the corporate world. So sometimes that's kind of hard to step out of.
Yes.
You're, you know, you're looking to do events and set up events, and you have a clear idea. So when you go to an event like this, you've got two purposes, maybe one as the participant and the other one as the you know, as the experience, maybe assessment or evaluation of some sort. And when you have those two hats, if the primary reason for going is to experience it and be the participant in it, how is showing up with the other hat actually impacting your overall experience?
Yeah, I mean, hugely, like, limiting it, for sure. I felt that I wasn't as fully engaged, you know. I wasn't, and I definitely see that as another trick of the ego, that it threw that up as a way that I could avoid doing the work that I need to do to evolve and to grow in my own sort of self development, by paying attention to all of those other things and having observation judgments on those, because, you know, or they're not doing it right, or I could do it better, or something like that. So it was so multi-layered, and, you know, it was all ways that I could avoid doing the work. And because, to be honest, I thought I didn't need the work, because I was like, I'm already done, I got it all, you know, I got all the consciousness that I need. When I realized, you know, that there is never end. It's a you know, a beautiful cycle of, like, master and child in all moments, you know.
Yeah. It's like your ego changes based on what situation you're in, who you're around. You know, you could think you're so incredibly zen after, you know, doing all this stuff, and then you spend one weekend with your family, which can, like, trigger you like no tomorrow, and then you kind of go, wow, I've really not come that far.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. It was almost like my ego, I think, as this chameleon that is constantly, you know, on my shoulder, on my back, on whatever, just sort of switching and changing into being whatever it needs to sort of, like, it's, again, these stray dogs, it's sniffing out where it thinks there's some sort of work to do. And it's interesting, I think I'm having a sort of moment of, like, as you are, or when we are conscious to some degree and we're doing the work, those opportunities where it's sniffing out the bit that needs the work, it then can give you the opportunity to do the work, but only if you see it. So there's kind of like an interesting silver lining, that the more the dogs bark at certain areas, you're like, okay, something needs to be worked out here, but only by paying attention and actually being committed, you can do the work yourself to do those parts of your ego to sort of clear it out. That's really what I feel like. I got handed a big can of, you know, wake up to yourself moment, which was really great, because I think it definitely helped me see things as I evolve, kind of also what I need to care for that toddler version of myself, but also, you know, to also be gentle and knowing that, like, we're all human and we're here wanting, desire to connect and to love and to grow. And, you know, as we bump into the different people in our lives, they give us situations for us to work those kinks out.
And just for those that have joined, I guess we're talking about the ego, and you mentioned something about connection. And there's something about also we come onto this planet and we're connected to our mother, who's external, and we get external love, external affection, external acknowledgement, or non-acknowledgement in some cases.
Yeah.
Which makes us all think that we're alone and independent. And I think one of the biggest things that I've realized is when you know, let's just say when you read enough books, you realize that all the books are kind of telling you that actually you're connected with God or the planet or energy or whatever it is that you believe in. And then when you feel lonely or down or when ego is triggered, it's because you have this perception of disconnection, which is not true. It's really not true. It's just our ego keeps us disconnected.
Yeah, and then like what moments does that bring out for us to work through to kind of find that connection, or and I think that's again going back to this kind of list of the environment, discussion, language, love, and our trust. I think one of the things we've talked a little bit about is like that converse relationship between confidence and trust. At first when you need to do something, you need like a lot of confidence, and then more and more that you trust yourself in this process, then that concept of confidence dissolves almost. And I think that's interesting as we go through the journey of our ego literally popping out this like the dogs barking in different areas. It's then okay, now I need to go back and go back through my heart and trust and know that this is showing me something to clear my path forward, but also to reconnect me in a way if I'm open to the invitation.
Yeah. Exactly.
Fascinating. What ways has ego showed up for you? Going back to your kind of corporate world and things like that, is there places where you've seen it play out in a different context?
I think everyone who works in corporate would agree that there's a healthy level of ego.
Yeah.
I think anyone who's in a senior role and has some input or has the final say on strategy or direction, there's definitely a healthy sense of ego. It was prevalent the entire time. You have a disagreement with someone, like a lot of the time their ego is triggered. Like, let's just say their or maybe not their ego is triggered, but their experience of how they want the discussion to go is triggered. So let's just say they've got a sick child at home. They then come in, then you're challenging somebody in a meeting. Of course, they're not going to be, their full resilient, constructive self. But in organizations where politics exists, it's all about ego. It's all about territory. It's all about turf. It's not necessarily about getting the quickest and best outcome for the organization.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I talked about this before. I have a friend that's military background, and she talked about sort of project management in a military context, how kind of I don't know, I'm going to use my word, delicious it was, because it was sort of like we come to a place, everyone sort of has their say, the higher rank to some degree says, not who's the winner, but like where they're going forward and what the choice is, and then everyone just falls into place and moves forward. And it's really interesting that I'm not to say there's no ego journey within the military concept or world at all, but it is an interesting way of like, for some reason it dissolves or that sort of decision-making process doesn't carry it through.
I'd say that in the military there's a healthy level of respect for the people above you.
Yeah.
And if you have respect for those above you, you'd probably be reprimanded quite quickly.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas in organizations, like that
never happens.
I guess it depends on the organization. Yeah. We're a relatively small organization, and the leadership team are quite astute and conscious based, and they just want to move forward quickly. Then clearly a lot of the things that we're talking about with ego being triggered are not going to show up. But yeah. I there was one example where I wanted a particular part of a solution to be implemented, and I was told that I was not allowed to use two specific words to describe it because the other person would get triggered. And I'm like, but that's what it's called. It's an industry standard term. And I'm like, you just can't use it because this person's going to go off. And I was like, okay. It's just, if that's not ego, like do you know what I mean? If that's not ego wrapping up something from childhood.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. Tell us, I think we have a few more minutes before, I'm curious, just when someone would come to you with an ego-based response, like what did that trigger in your ego? Was it a back and forth in the context? Because I often think some of those, knots become a double ego moment.
Yeah, I mean, definitely in a work context, like, a lot of my role required financial analysis. So I had the facts, I had the figures, I had my story based around what I'd analysed.
Mm-hmm.
So if I knew I was right, I was right. And if I knew I was wrong, and I could just go, here, this is it. So when I had somebody, and I guess the difficulty comes when you have something creative or you have something strategic and the numbers don't support it, or let's just say you're willing to compromise 30% of a budget for it to be like creative and avant-garde versus 50%, which is what, the creative team wants. And you're kind of like, actually, that's not going to work financially for the business. So, yeah, of course, ego would come up all the time because I'd be like, I have the information, here it is, you all need to understand it, let's make a decision. But not everybody wants to work that way. So patience was required on my part. But I was kind of like, they call it, don't be an A-player asshole. That's what they call it.
Yeah.
Because you can be really good at what you do, but you can have a level of arrogance and be labelled an asshole while you do it, which is not nice.
Like almost your way or the highway, which again was a bit of separation in the sense, well, I know what I have is right, and if you can't see it, that's your problem. But it still doesn't move you forward in the situation. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for everyone today for joining us. We've had a great day talking about ego and really seeing sort of this chameleon, approach that it has to sort of turn up and appear in all different outfits and conversations and situations to sort of break us down, to keep us small and to keep us separated from ourselves and from our higher power, however you sort of talk about it, and also to to keep us in a place of safety. And I think there's a lot of things to look at of like, what do we need to feel safe, and how can we give that to ourselves without looking for it externally. So thank you so much for joining us. It was great to talk to you all, and we'll be back next week. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, darling.
Bye.
Bye.